So, uh, so today I'm going to tell you a few stories about this building and about some of the people connected to it and to the state's history. We will be going up the stairs in a little while. If you're sick of steps, there's 30 more here, but the elevator also goes up to floor 2. You can take that. That's where the public restrooms are located. And also, you're welcome to take photos. Just don't use a flash when you do. Now, before you can have a permanent state capitol building like this, you need a permanent capital city. And Tennessee did not have one for nearly 50 years after becoming a state in 1796. So, for some context, we're the 16th state, the last to join the Union under the presidency of George Washington. So, until that time, the legislature met in different cities around Tennessee. So, we had a rotating capital. Most of those cities were in East Tennessee. But by 1843, the state decided, okay, let's just pick one. Uh, it came down as a contest mostly between two of the temporary cities. Murfreesboro was one. That's about 45 minutes east of here. It's the geographic center of the state, so as close to every Tennessean as you can be at one point in the state. But Nashville was the other one, and it had some advantages. The Cumberland River, for example, transportation made it easier for legislators to get here. But also the mayor of Nashville and some prominent citizens got together and spent $30,000 purchasing 4 acres on top of the highest hill in the city. Uh, and don't offered it to the state for $1 if they would make Nashville the capital city. So, spoiler alert, that is what happened. And if you did climb a lot of stairs to get here, congratulations, you made it up the highest hill in the city. Now, by 1845, they have formed a Capitol Building Commission and they're looking at different plans. They wanted something grand. They felt that Tennessee had become more important and influential in national politics, particularly after the presidency of Andrew Jackson, the seventh president. So when they chose an architect, they chose somebody they thought was worthy of that. And it was this man, William Strickland. Now, I'll pause here for a second to tell you that normally this painting is on the wall over here, along with this hallway is full of paintings of governors. But because of the renovation of the buildings, all the paintings have been temporarily moved to protect them from the elements and the changes in temperature and humidity. Um, so unfortunately, those paintings are no longer here. But this was one of them, and Strickland, by 1845, was a renowned American architect. He was based out of Philadelphia. Have you guys been to Philadelphia? By chance? You're right there in New Jersey. You're not too far away, are you?
We have passed through it, but
uh, well, if you do get a chance to visit, there are a number of buildings there designed by Strickland while he lived there. And they all have something in common with this one in that they're in the Greek Revival style. So this is considered a prime example of Greek Revival architecture. Um, the Strickland designed the porticos that extend from all sides of the building with the tall columns, the tower on top. All of those elements were modeled after ruins of structures that are on or near the Acropolis in Athens, Greece to this very day. We don't have a dome. Uh, Most state capitals have one. We're one of 12 that do not. The reason for that, domes are more of a Roman style of architecture, and Strickland wanted this to be as purely Greek as that could be. So, no dome for no dome for Tennessee. But there are Roman elements inside it. If I remember, I'll point them out later. Now, the state, when it came time to fund this building, did not want to pass a special tax on Tennesseans, so they came up with various ways to try to save money. One of those was the use of convict labor. The state penitentiary happened to be a few blocks from here. They opened a quarry near the state penitentiary. They used prisoners in the quarry. They used enslaved African Americans. We know that because Strickland placed an ad in the newspaper for them. And we also know it was literally backbreaking work. We have an article reporting that one of the enslaved laborers had his spine broken by a lever while working at the quarry. Enslaved labor was also used to dig out the foundation for this building. We're on top of a limestone hill that had to be carved down about 4 feet before they could begin construction. Now, how the process worked, the stone was cut from the quarry, it was taken into the state penitentiary. Prisoners were trained to be stone cutters, and they carved it into the shapes that you see here. It was then hauled up the hill and put into place by stonemasons. So this is solid Big B limestone. Uh, There are blocks in these walls that are up to 7 feet thick and can weigh up to 10 tons on the lower level. So quite a manual accomplishment to get those stones up here and put into place. Now, Strickland estimated it would take 3 to 5 years to build this building. He was wrong by a lot. Um, there were many delays of funding from the legislature. There were a fire at the state prison, which delayed work at the prison. There were even epidemics. So it ends up taking 14 years. So they started in 1845, they're finished in 1859, just before the Civil War breaks out. Now, Strickland, unfortunately, even though he considered this his crowning achievement as an architect, and he moved here to build this building, he did not live to see it completed. He died 5 years before it was done, so he never saw the tower on top of the building. But he knew that he would that this would be his crowning achievement, so he made a special request of the legislature to ensure that you guys and all future generations knew that this was his building. Do you happen to know what he requested, or want to take a guess? Well, he designed his own tomb, and his casket is in a vault in the wall underneath the north portico on the outside of the building. So that makes us the only state capital to have a president. To have a person buried inside the building. Now, this person here was also important to the construction of the building. His name is Samuel Morgan. He was a wealthy Nashvilleian. He had found success in the dry goods business. He volunteered and was selected to serve on the building commission. Was one of the original members, only one to serve the full 14 years it was under construction, chairman by the time that Strickland died. Even after the building was finished, Morgan was consulted about what the grounds around the building should look like. So when Morgan died in 1880, the legislature felt that he too should be forever associated with the building. So any guess what happened to Morgan after he died?
Buried in a wall?
He's buried here too. He's underneath the south portico. So we have two people buried in the building. You guys have any questions so far about anything? Okay, let me set these down. So and when they first started using this building as a state house, all three branches of the state government were located in the building. So this is mid-1850s. When they did this was the executive end of the building. It's still the executive end of the building. That office there with the two flags is the governor's office. Current governor is named Bill Lee. He's at the end of his second consecutive term, which is the maximum allowed. So once he's out of office, tradition holds his portrait will be painted and it will be added to that pier right there. Normally, the 8 most recent former governors are hanging here. Post-Civil War governors are that way. Pre-Civil War governors this way. The most famous of which is Sam Houston, who was a governor of Tennessee as well as of Texas, the only person to serve as governor of 2 different states. Not to mention president of a country, he was president of Texas when it was a Union Republic. Now, we had a clue on the ceiling here that this was the executive branch. That's the state seal there, just to indicate. Number 16 there for the 16th state. More clues on the ceiling. This is Lady Liberty, sort of the Revolutionary War version of her. She's got a liberty pole and a liberty cap. She indicates the legislative branch, which is upstairs. We'll head up there in just a minute. Here's another Lady Justice for the judicial branch. She's the Roman version, so no blindfold for this version. But she indicates the judicial branch. We're going to go there now. They may be setting up for a meeting in there, so we may not be able to. Yeah, let's see anybody here. Guys, we'll come over here. You're welcome to sit down. We'll be talking about this painting in a few minutes, so if you want to sit down, I recommend over here. Now, as I mentioned, this was the judicial end of the building, and this was the Tennessee Supreme Court chamber. When they first started using this as a Supreme Court chamber, we had 3 justices who sat here for the same reason that we had 3 stars on our state land, you guys have to know about it, police car, you know, Texas has one star,
Yeah. Okay.
the Lone Star State.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Tennessee has three because we're 3 times better.
Oh, that makes sense.
No, I'm just
I mean, was that Sam Houston's opinion? Because he should know.
kidding. Yeah, he would know.
He would know. Yeah.
Big Dad.
Yeah.
No, I'm just joking, of course. Tennessee is a long, thin state. It's divided into 3 main divisions, east, middle, and west. So they used to be politically distinctive, so we had one judge. Let's see, a prosecutor was there and a teacher was there who had talked about evolution at school. They decided to do a test case to see, you know, if it would stand up to a constitutional test. So there was a huge trial there in Dayton, Tennessee. If you've ever heard of the movie Inherit the Wind, or the play, that was based on that trial. Nationally sensational trial. He was found guilty, John T. Scopes, of violating the law, which is the outcome everybody wanted because they were testing the case. They wanted to take it up, see how high it would go up through the court. When it came here, the justices ruled to overturn the verdict because once he was fined $100 once he was found guilty. But they didn't overturn it because they disagreed with the law. They ruled that the law was constitutional, but that the judge in Dayton only had the authority to fine Scopes $150, not $100. So they overturned it on a technicality. And I read an article soon after that says that was intentional because it stopped here. It didn't go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Case in. Now, they used this room until the 1930s when they outgrew the space, unlike, say, Texas, which has a huge state capitol. This one is a small one. They moved to a new building across the street in 1937, which is still there today. So if you're interested in more history, they have a small judiciary history museum there. Once they moved out, other people needed this space, so they divided it up into 3 offices. If you look closely at some of these columns, you'll see scars from where conduit and walls and things were attached to it. That lasted for about 50 years, and then in the late 1980s, they were renovating the building and decided to restore this room to as closely as they could get it to look to how it was in the 1850s. So that's what you're seeing now, reproduction chairs, closely as they think they can get it to look to how it looked in the 1850s. Now today, civic groups can use the space. That's what it's set up for now. If the governor gives a press conference from this podium, that's why they have those extra lights. Occasionally, the Supreme Court will meet here. I arrived on a day in February, saw a lot of activity, and stuck my head in the door and snapped a picture. And it was a long bench up here, and 5 justices over here, black-robed justices. They held court here for one day. For some reason, I still don't know why. Coincidentally, the Senate was meeting in the chamber above our heads. The House was in session, and the governor was here. So we had all 3 branches of the state government back in the same building, just like they first started doing in the 1850s. I want to talk briefly about this painting here. It is called The Pride of Tennessee. It was donated to the state in 1996, which was the state's 200th. It depicts people considered important to Tennessee's history. The most notable ones are in the center there because they were U.S. presidents from Tennessee. You may recognize the man in the very middle there. That's Andrew Jackson. He was our 7th president. He rose to national fame during the War of 1812. That sort of propelled him into popularity enough to become president. He was known as the hero of the Battle of New Orleans because he was the general over U.S. forces there in a lopsided victory over the British forces in a battle that ironically took place after the war was over. The Treaty of Ghent had been signed in England, but the news took too long to reach America, so they fought the battle anyway. And he ends up becoming president. Now, he was controversial in his own time. He's controversial today. He was an enslaver. He's estimated to have had over 300 African Americans enslaved in his plantation over his lifetime. That place was called the Hermitage. It is a presidential home today. It's about 30 minutes east of here, so if you're looking for more history. Some of this, I'm telling you, may have seen in the State Museum. If you were there, you probably saw a lot of it. So sorry to retread the old ground. He's also the president who signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830. So led to forced marching of tens of thousands of Native Americans off lands in the southeastern United States westward. If you're driving around here, you will see roads with signs marked Historic Trail of Tears that mark some of those routes taken. It was called that because thousands died on the marches. Now, Jackson himself died in 1845, just coincidentally 1 month before they started working on this building. Just a few months prior to that, the man to the left there, James K. Polk, became the 11th president of the United States. He was the first dark horse candidate for president because he did not seek the presidency. He was selected by his party. He said, essentially, okay, I'll run, but I promise I will only serve 1 term. I will accomplish this, this, and this, and this if elected. So he was elected, and he set out to do what he said he would do, mainly expand the western borders of the United States all the way to the Pacific Ocean. That included annexing Texas into statehood, which had been an independent republic prior to that, provoking a war with Mexico, after which the U.S. acquired land that is today California, Arizona, New Mexico, other states. He also treated with the British to avoid yet another war with them. They drew a line through the Oregon Territory at the 49th parallel. That is today's Canadian border. So under Polk's presidency, about a third of the contiguous United States was acquired during that time. Now, do you guys think he kept his promise and did not seek a second term? See, a little skepticism, a definite no, but a little skepticism from you. He did. In 1849, his first term was up, and he said, I'm done. I did everything I said I was going to do. I'm out of here. He retired here to Nashville with his wife. They had a house about a block and a half away from here. Unfortunately for him, though, he ends up with the shortest retirement of any president because he arrives here at the same time as a cholera epidemic. So he was dead within about 3 months getting here. Now, the architect of the building, William Strickland, he's here working on the building in 1849, so he is selected to design Polk's tomb, which, when finished, is placed in the front yard of their home, where his widow lives another 40-something years. When she died in 1891, she was entombed with him, but the property fell into private hands. They had no direct heirs. It was a legal battle. Eventually, a developer acquired it, tore down the presidential house, built an apartment building called Hope Flats. That building is long gone as well. Before that can happen, the state did not want a presidential tomb on private land, so they relocated it. Any idea where they relocated the tomb? You can probably guess. Very close. It's over there. It's on the grounds of this building. So we're the only state capital to have a president, much less a president and a first lady, buried on the grounds. So that's 4 bodies, if you're keeping count of bodies that are here. And finally, of the presidents, the man to the right of Jackson there is Andrew Johnson, the 17th president. Prior to that, he was a governor of Tennessee, just like Polk, but Johnson's the first governor to walk the hallways of this building when they start using it as a state house in the mid-1850s. Now, the legislature here elected Johnson to the U.S. Senate, and he was in Washington, D.C. when the Civil War broke out. Tennessee voted to join the Confederate States of America, so this building was a Confederate state capitol building. It was even engraved on the Confederate $20 bill. That did not last very long. Early in the war, February 1862, the Union Army arrived in Nashville. The Confederates fled. The Union Army occupied the city for the rest of the war, and they occupied this building and turned it into a fort. They had stockades going around it with cannons bristling on all sides. During that time, they called it Fort Andrew Johnson, named it after him. Why? Not because he had previously been a governor of Tennessee, but because he was the only U.S. senator from the South who did not side with the South. He sided with the Union, with the North. So President Abraham Lincoln made him the military governor of Tennessee. So Johnson came back to this building as governor for a second time, which is why they named it after him. Now, eventually, Lincoln has to run for re-election. Usually, he picks a different vice presidential candidate. He chooses Johnson. He's a Democrat. Lincoln was a Republican, so he had a mixed party ticket, something that would be very unusual today. Um, Lincoln won re-election. The Union Army won the war, but we know what happened to Lincoln after the war. He was assassinated. So that is how Andrew Johnson became the 17th president of the United States. Now, Johnson was a controversial figure too. He was famous for a speech that he first gave here on the portico of this building to a large crowd referring to, who's governor, referring to Confederates. He said, "Treason must be made odious and traitors impoverished." He gave that speech so often it was his stump speech. Even gave it when he was running for vice president. But after he became president, he changed his tune nearly 180 degrees. He disagreed with Congress about how the South should be treated after the Civil War. U.S. Congress wanted to punish the South, definitely did not want former Confederates running state governments like this one, so they disenfranchised ex-Confederate soldiers. Johnson opposed that. Johnson pardoned numerous ex-Confederate officers to give them the freedom to vote. But he also opposed civil rights for African Americans. So Johnson, for instance, opposed the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which granted citizenship to newly freed enslaved people, nearly 4 million African Americans. So Johnson and Congress fought about Reconstruction and lots of other things to the point where Johnson was impeached. He was the first U.S. president to be impeached. He came the closest to being removed to any president, one vote away from being removed from office. But he was not. He was acquitted by one vote in the Senate, served out his only term as president. He wasn't popular after that, so no second term. He came back here to Tennessee. Now today, Johnson is considered by many historians to be one of our worst presidents, mainly because of his behavior during the Reconstruction era. But after coming back to Tennessee, he was reelected to the U.S. Senate. So he is the only former president to return to Washington, D.C. as a senator. He was only there a few months before he too died. Today he is buried in Greenville, Tennessee, not here, like so many other people. That is the presidents from Tennessee. By the way, if you Google that, they do not come up as Tennessee presidents because they were born in the Carolinas, so they're considered Carolina presidents. They were Tennesseans when they were presidents. We get to claim them too. Some more of the people up there we'll cover briefly here. I don't want to go too long. The building closes at 4 o'clock, so I'll give you guys a little time to look around. Have you had time to look around yet at all? Okay. Lower right here is a man named John Sevier, Revolutionary War soldier known as the hero of the Battle of Kings Mountain. Ends up becoming the governor of the state of Franklin. You guys heard of the state of Franklin? Proto-state that never was officially recognized by the United States. So once it dissolves, he ends up helping Tennessee become a state. So he's the state's first governor. I'm sure you've heard of Dolly Parton. She's from Sevierville, Tennessee, which is named after this man. Woman in the lower right is Ida B. Wells. She's born into slavery in Mississippi, but after the war moved her family to the Memphis area. She was a teacher, a civil rights activist, suffragist, but she's most known for being an investigative journalist. She had a newspaper in Memphis in the early 1890s called The Free Speech and Headlight. In that newspaper, she campaigned against lynching, which was a particularly common crime at the time where a mob would murder someone accused of the crime. Most often they were African American. She had a friend murdered in that way. While she was out of town, on campaigning against it, giving talks against it, someone took over her offices, her creditors actually took over her offices, shut down the free speech. And she was warned never to return under threat of violence. So she didn't. She became a resident of Chicago, where today they have a memorial to her there and a road named after her. The man in green there is Alvin C. York. Some people know him from a movie starring Gary Cooper called Sergeant York. He's one of the most decorated soldiers from the Great War, World War I. He was born in Fentress County, Tennessee, and was a conscientious objector to fighting due to his religion. But he got drafted by the Army nonetheless, wrestled with the idea morally and decided that he should fight. Ended up being considered an excellent soldier. He's credited with action during a battle in France in which he single-handedly captured over 100 German soldiers. He was awarded the U.S. Medal of Honor and the French Cross of. If you happen to walk around the grounds, you may see a tall statue of a man aiming a rifle at a sergeant work. Statue sculpted by a guy named Felix de Weldon, also sculpted the Iwo Jima Monument in Washington, D.C. D.C. is the Marines raising the flag. You've seen that, the same artist. The man in the lower line, or left, I'm sorry, is not Louis Armstrong, like I thought. That is W.C. Handy. Now, Handy was born in Alabama to a father who was a minister. Expected his son to be a minister. One of the things his father preached was that musical instruments lead to wickedness and sin. As you can see, and as you might imagine, Handy got into music by the time he was a teenager. He grew up to be a blues composer, spent time in Memphis, during which he was the first person to publish blues in sheet music format. So today he's considered the father of the blues. And then finally, the man in the upper left is Cordell Hull. He was a state representative, so at one time he walked these hallways. But he's most known for being the U.S. Secretary of State under Franklin Delano Roosevelt during World War II. After the war in 1945, Hull was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in helping to establish the United Nations. Other people we'll talk about upstairs. The woman in pink is Ann Dallas Dudley. She was a Nashville suffragist. The man with the long rifle and buckskin shirt, you guys may have a guess about who that is, or do you? Some people do. That's David Crockett. Some people have heard of him. And the man with the turban there is a Cherokee Native American named Sequoia. We'll talk about him upstairs. Do you guys have any questions before we move on?
Why did Johnson change his mind about the Confederates and how they should be treated after?
I don't really know. I think part of it was that he was from the South and he was from Tennessee. Tennessee was one of the states that were going to be treated in a certain way. He also, judging by his actions regarding African Americans, he was willing that they go free. He released his own enslaved people before he was even required to by law. But he didn't think they should be citizens. So he was more aligned ultimately after the war. Before the war, he was Union. He said we shouldn't be fighting over slavery. He was pro-Union. But after the war, once he was president, he said, okay, now that the war's over, it's fine that African Americans are free, but they shouldn't necessarily be citizens. And he thought that the people in their states in the South should run their own governments. But Congress thought differently. They were concerned it would revert back to how it was before the war, so they didn't want that to happen. So yeah, I think it's mostly because this simply is lied mostly in the South. And even though he was a Southern Unionist, apparently more Southern. Uh-huh. Welcome to the second floor. On the original plans, this was labeled the first floor. The level we were just on was the basement. The level below that was the crypt, which sounds like where the bodies should be, but it was actually the state armory for many, many decades. So as many as 8,000 firearms were once stored on that level. But this is the level Strickland wanted you to be impressed with. We don't have a dome, so no rotunda, but we do have this nearly 40-foot high ceiling with one of the 4 original chandeliers that are still in the building. These originally ran on gas and were manufactured by a company in Philadelphia called Cornelius and Baker. That's why I mentioned earlier Philadelphia. We have a lot of connections to Philadelphia, not just the art. Over here we'll see it's state representative that points out, also a U.S. congressman. Now, I mentioned earlier that Andrew Jackson was controversial in his own time, not just today. Crockett is an example of that. He fought with Jackson alongside of him in the War of 1812. And they were friends and allies until Jackson advocated for the Indian removal. Of 1830, Crockett opposed him on that publicly. Now, that's said to have cost him re-election in 1831, so he was out for a term. But back for another term, ran for re-election, lost, and the story goes is that he was very upset about this and went back to his constituents in West Tennessee and said to them, you can all go to hell, I'm going to Texas. He ended up at the Alamo, where he was killed along with all the other defenders of the Alamo, and clashed there with the Mexican army over territory. That was in 1836. Now, most people know him as Davy Crockett. One of the main reasons for that is Walt Disney. They made a TV series about him in 1955. If you happen to have Disney Streaming Plus or YouTube, I recommend looking for it. Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, because you'll see this building in 1955. They filmed scenes here. In the building, in the movie, this building is not the Tennessee State Capitol because it did not exist in Crockett's time. In the movie, this is the U.S. Capitol, and in the movie, this is the U.S. Congress. Now, this is the largest room in the building. It's the Hall of Representatives, or they mostly call it the House Chamber today. Tennessee has 99 representatives, representing about 70,000 Tennesseans each, and they meet on a part-time basis, which for Tennessee means annually from January to April or May. When they are in session, the public can watch from the galleries up here. If you have time after the tour, you can go up if you're outside the right-hand stairs. I think this side is closed, but you're welcome to go up there and look around. If the public is watching and you're a Tennessean, you can see how your representative votes by looking at these monitors. They'll have all 99 names there. As they vote, their name changes color to match red for yes, or no, green for yes, and blue for abstaining. So if you're in the room, you can see how your representative votes. The same information is broadcast to TVs and and out over the internet. A number of stories connected to this room. I already mentioned David Crockett. Elvis Presley spoke here in 1961. He was born in Mississippi, but quite famous by then, 1961, and living in Memphis. So the state was trying to claim him as its own and honor him here that day. That day, these galleries were full of screaming teenagers. It had to be gavelled to order. But the most famous story associated with this room concerns the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which is women's suffrage, women's right to vote. In 1919, the Congress had voted to allow for the Constitution to be amended, but it required 36 states to approve it. At that time, 36, there were only 48 states. So if the suffragists could get 36, they could change the Constitution. The problem is, a year later, they had 35. They needed just one more. The problem for them was that all the other states either were not in session or they had already voted it down, voted against it. Now, Tennessee wasn't in session either, as I mentioned, with part-time legislature. But the governor was convinced to hold a special session, and so that's what happened in August 1920. Representatives came back to this chamber, senators to their chamber to debate whether or not to ratify the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So the whole nation's attention focused on this building, because a vote here could affect the whole country. Now, it was a contentious issue. There were men and women, both for and against women's right to vote. To give you an idea of how contentious, a senator gave a speech in the Senate chamber down the hallway during that session, in which he characterized the women fighting for suffrage as childless and of the low neck, meaning low neckline, high skirt variety, who should be at home rocking a cradle. Now, when he said that, he was hissed at by people in the public gallery of the Senate chamber. So it was not a universally popular opinion, but it was popular enough that local suffragist Ann Dallas Dudley, who I pointed out in the painting downstairs, she was known for involving her children in her activism. She would take them to marches. She would include them in publicity photos, all with the aim of showing that you could be both a mother and be involved in politics. Now, in the Senate chamber, it passed overwhelmingly, 25-4 yes for ratification. But we're bicameral. That means this chamber had to approve it as well. And here it met resistance. The Speaker of the House at that time, who occupied the highest podium there on the rostrum, was against women's right to vote in ratifying the 19th Amendment. So he came up with strategies to try to defeat it. The first one was to quickly hold a vote to table it, put it off until January, when the session would begin. But the problem was it tied. It didn't pass. There were 3 members were absent, so it didn't pass. But he didn't give up. He held the vote again, but again it tied. So his strategy failed. But he became convinced that this assembly was deadlocked on the issue, and so he decided to go ahead and hold a direct vote on ratification, thinking when it tied again, that would be the same as a no vote. That would kill ratification in Tennessee, and some other state could worry about being the perfect 36th state to pass it. The problem for him, though, was that when he held the direct vote on ratification, one member of this assembly changed the way he had been voting previously. His name was Harry T. Byrne. He was the youngest member of this assembly at 24 years old. He was a freshman representative, so it was his first term as a representative. He had expressed moral support for women's suffrage, but he had been voting against it. Why? Because he was up for re-election, and he thought his constituents back home were against it, so he's voting against it. But when the vote came to him, yes or no on women's right to vote, he voted yes. And when he did, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and within a few days, I've heard estimates upwards to 30 million women in America had their right to vote federally recognized for the first time in America. Now, women of color still had decades of barriers to overcome to have free access to the polls, but that crucial vote happened here in this room. Now, Byrne got into some trouble for voting the way that he did. The antis, as they were called, were expecting him to keep voting against it. He didn't. He was accused of bribery in the papers and humiliated. He was pressured to change his vote, which he didn't. He eventually offered some explanations for why he voted the way that he did. One of the reasons he gave, he said the very morning of the vote, he had received a letter in the mail, a letter that was carried up to him, to this chamber, and given to him. It was a letter from a constituent. He had it in his jacket when he voted. And it was a letter that contained the line, "Don't forget to be a good boy and help the suffragists." Can anybody imagine who that constituent might have been?
His mother.
His mother, that's right. Feb Byrne was her name. One of the reasons she wrote her son, she read about the speech I mentioned earlier in her local newspaper, and she referenced it in her letter to her son. Also, she knew that senator. They were from the same part of East Tennessee. In fact, that senator was Burns's mentor as a freshman representative. So all of that happened here. You guys have any questions before we move on to another part of the building? I'll tell you a couple more things. It's looking like the legislative lounge may be being used, so we may not be able to go in there. We'll try to peek in there, but I'll tell you a couple stories here before we leave. Notice the columns here have no horizontal seams on them, like the outside columns are drums stacked. These are single pieces of stone. So those were cut from the quarry a few blocks from here, carved by prisoners into those shapes, and then hauled up here and put into place. There are 16 of them in the room. And also you'll notice the chandeliers here. These are 4 reproduction chandeliers. If you look in the middle, you'll see a hole with a light in it, 2 concentric circles. There used to be only one chandelier in this building, hanging from that hole, and it was nationally renowned for its size and for its beauty. It was nearly 15 feet in diameter, so you see that outer circle there. Imagine a chandelier that large hanging right here in the middle of the room. It was profusely decorated with statuettes of Native Americans, 18 inches tall. There were 12 of those. There were 6 buffalo statuettes. There were stalks of corn, cotton, tobacco, little elk heads, even American eagles, all on one chandelier, 48 gas burners. Just imagine how huge it was. But if you sat near it, underneath it, apparently it could be worrisome. If the windows in this chamber were open and a strong wind came through, that chandelier would start to sway back and
I
forth.
don't want to sit there.
Yeah, people got worried it was going to fall. So in 1889, the representatives from Memphis, who did happen to sit directly underneath it, proposed to have it removed. That resolution passed. 2 plumbers got the low bid of $50, came in, removed all the statuettes and decorations, and cut the chandelier out. Superintendent of the building later called it an act of vandalism. He said it was so difficult to remove that it could have been there safely for the life of the building. But it wasn't. They auctioned off the decorative elements and got rid of the chandelier. So today it is long gone. We have 2 photographs that have survived, and a few of the statuettes and decorations are in the collection of the State Museum. One day they will be displayed in a Capitol Visitor Center that's currently being built across the street. So if you come back after January 2027, hopefully that will be open and you can see some of those decorations. You guys have any questions? Okay, let's go see if the legislative lounge is open. Yeah, they're preparing for a meeting there. So you guys can peek in. If you stand on here, or where I'm just standing, look, you'll see one of the other original chandeliers. See a spiral staircase. Going right here, the levels of the balcony here. This room was completed in 1859. It was the last room completed in the building. So that chandelier there is original to the building. It looks very different from these, however, you'll notice. So it's a different architect. This one is decorated with Tennessee passion flowers, purple passion flowers. This is Tennessee state wildflower. And this room was, you can't see it here. If you get inside and look back, the walls are covered in shelves because this was the state library and archives for over 90 years. Like the Supreme Court downstairs, they outgrew the space. So in 1953, they moved to a building across the street. 250 tons of material was taken out of this room and out of the attic space. And they did. And moved over there. And today they're in a new building about 4 years ago on the Bicentennial Mall. You were already been to the State Museum, you said. You were right across the park from the State Library and Archives. That's also open to the public. Starting tomorrow, they're not open today, unfortunately. And if we step over here, we can see a bust there of Sequoia. He was in the painting downstairs. When I'm done, you guys might be able to just walk in and look around. You can just ask them. He's a Cherokee Native American who, as a young man, noticed that European Americans could communicate by putting marks on pieces of paper. He was fascinated by this, but at the time, no Native American tribe had a writing system or a written language of any sort, partly because many of them considered it a form of sorcery to be able to communicate in that way. Sequoia thought differently. He thought it would be beneficial for the Cherokee Nation to be able to communicate that way, so he spent 12 years developing a written writing system for them, which they ultimately adopted in 1821, after trying him for sorcery, actually. But he was able to prove that it worked. So it worked, so they used it. Still use it to this day. So if you get a chance to go in there, or you can look it up on the internet, you'll see what he came up with, which is a syllabary, not an alphabet. And a syllabary is a collection of symbols, in this case about 85 for every syllable sound in the Cherokee language. So if you knew the language and could memorize the symbols, you could write the language. This is said to have accounted for the fact that a few years after it was adopted, the Cherokee Nation had a higher literacy rate than the rest of the country at that time. And if you do get in there, the plaque, you'll see his name on it, but underneath is his name in Cherokee. And so it's a good example of the language, because it's only 3 symbols, one for each syllable. Sequoia. So that's it. Do you guys have any questions I can try to answer before I cut you loose? You've got less than 15 minutes to look around, so I wanted to give you some time to look around. Although so much is closed, we've gone about everywhere we can. So.
Is anywhere in particular you recommend we look at?
Really high. Yeah, I used to. I would say go out on the balconies, but both of them are closed. The one other place you can go is go right. Look to your right. Once you get to the representatives' chambers, you'll see more steps going up there. Go up there and look at the room from up there. You get a different angle of the rostrum and see some different views from up there.
Okay, so that's inside the doors on the right? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Go towards that door and then just look right. You'll see stairs going in. Also, before you leave, if you have a chance, go down to the governor's office. I pointed out with the 2 flags. You can't go in. It's not on the tour. There's a rope there, but you're welcome to walk right up to it and look in. You will see murals painted there in the 1930s depicting Tennessee history that look much better in person than they do in the little brochure picture. And then at the desk where we met, if you have time, there are 3 large photographs laid out there showing this building during the Civil War. So you can see what it looked like with long stockades around it and bristling with cannons on all sides. Also at the desk is a small white sign with a QR code. That is a short 4 or 5 question survey. If you feel so inclined, we always appreciate feedback. Again, my name is Alan. Thank you all for visiting the Tennessee State Capitol. Hope you have a fun visit while you're in Nashville.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're
Awesome.
very welcome. Thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Yes.